Minister Freeland, Bill C-5 allows your federal Liberal government to circumvent federal laws if your government decides a project is, quote, in the national interest. Several years ago, your government forced through the egregious Bill C-69. In doing so, you ignored the strong warnings of not only our Conservative opposition, but also all provincial governments, I believe. So, Minister, rather than allowing Bill C-5 to give your government the ability to circumvent highly problematic federal laws for, quote, national interest projects, why don't you just repeal Bill C-69 for once and for all?
Folks, we got to talk about what happened yesterday in the House of Commons because the Conservatives did something I was not expecting. So without further ado, let's get into the story. Now, last week on Friday, we talked about the Liberals trying to put forward this sweeping new bill of theirs, Bill C-5, and the immense power that this bill will hold. And we touched upon how the Bloc, the NDP, the Greens, all were opposed to it. I was under the impression that the Conservatives also would have been opposed to it, but they actually voted in favor of the bill yesterday to move into the second reading / committee hearings to take place this week, Tuesday and Wednesday, to basically fast track this bill through Parliament before the summer break. Now, this article came out in the National Post saying Liberals to pass major projects bill this week with Conservative support. Chrystia Freeland, she was in the Senate, as you saw from the opener there. She was being questioned. It goes on to say, Conservatives will be supporting the Liberal government's internal trade and major projects bill that is expected to be passed before Canada Day, revealed by Leo Housakis, the leader of the opposition in the Senate. Freeland thanked Housakis for recognizing and highlighting the Conservatives are supporting this legislation. Bill C-5 would give the federal government sweeping powers for 5 years to quickly approve natural resources and infrastructure projects once Cabinet deems them to be in the national interest, as well as break down internal trade barriers and make it easier for the workers to work in other provinces. Now, before I finish reading this, as I mentioned, the Bloc, the Greens, and the NDP all were opposed to this, but not just them. We actually have a Liberal, Nate Erskine-Smith, who kind of tends to vote against his government from time to time, actually come out against this bill and saying there's a lot of problems with it. And he had like a whole 7 to 10 minute speech. I'm going to play just a little bit of it so you can get a grasp of what he has to say.
Now, against the economic threat posed by President Trump, Canadian politicians have rightly renewed calls for building up our country. I'm one of them. It is a nation-building moment. A strong and resilient domestic economy is a priority. Of course it should be. And to that end, we should remove unreasonable barriers to economic growth. If a rule doesn't contribute to the public interest, or if its negative cost is disproportionate to any positive contribution, we should do away with it. But that doesn't mean we should pursue economic growth no matter the cost. Depending on the project, there may be competing public interest considerations: biodiversity and habitat protection, indigenous rights, climate change, long-term cost effectiveness, democratic participation, and more. Yet, under the guise of responding to the threat posed by Trump, we are sacrificing other important values. We aren't thinking about unintended consequences, and we are actively undermining our parliamentary democracy. Consider the case of two Bill 5s, Doug Ford's Bill 5 and the federal government's Bill C-5. Ontario's Bill 5 became law last week. It gutted habitat protection just to start, but it also enacted the Special Economic Zones Act to give the government unnecessarily and disproportionately unchecked power. Effectively, the government can now designate special economic zones and then exempt or alter any provincial or municipal law that would apply to a company or project within those zones. EcoJustice rightly called it a threat to democracy. Worse. The Ford government shut down democratic debate, curtailed committee scrutiny, and jammed the bill through the legislature. Now, okay, par for the course for Doug Ford, maybe. Fair. But EcoJustice has also called the federal government's Bill C-5 a threat to democracy. And no Liberal government should welcome that accusation. Worse, in Bill C-5, in Bill 5 deja vu, this federal government is proposing to shut down democratic debate, curtail committee scrutiny, and jam the bill through the legislature. It would all actually make Harper blush. Liberals would rightly scream, that we would scream if a federal Conservative government attempted the same. Now, okay, fairly, Fairly well, they share similar goals, and yes, they suffer some similar defects. The federal Bill C-5 isn't exactly the same as Ford's. Part 1 of our legislation, the Free Trade and Labor Mobility Act, it usefully aims to harmonize federal and provincial rules where reasonably possible. The idea is simple: to avoid duplicative regulation of goods, services, and labor where federal and provincial rules are comparable. And yes, of course, the devil is in the details of assessing what comparable means, but it is a welcome move. The problems with Bill C-5 lie in Part 2, the Building Canada Act. Its purpose is clear: to get national interest projects built more quickly. Okay, so far, so good. The proposed law streamlines authorizations at the same time as it emphasizes the importance of climate action and Indigenous rights. It's a huge and positive distinction from Ford's Bill 5. At no point does Ford's bill even mention climate change or the need to consult with affected Indigenous rights holders. But despite its promise, the proposed Building Canada Act has two major faults. First, it gives the government unfettered discretion in designating national interest projects, and second, similar to Ford's Bill 5, it gives the government unchecked power to exclude or alter any law that would otherwise apply to such a project. The Minister of Natural Resources, he set the stage for Bill C-5 in a May 23rd speech, calling for a renewed spirit of building by reframing the national conversation. No more asking, why build? The real question is, how do we get it done? It would be wise, in my view, of the government to take its own advice when it comes to Bill C-5. Rather than defending the why, the idea of the bill, we should refocus our attention on the how we pass it. In other words, we should improve the bill and respect democratic participation as we do so. First, we should welcome greater parliamentary and civil society scrutiny. The government's proposed guillotine motion seeks to limit parliamentary debate at every stage of the bill. More concerning, it will jam all expert and public testimony and all committee scrutiny in less than 2 days. For what? Consider that Parliament isn't currently scheduled to sit between June 20th and September 15th. We are rushing legislation through Parliament under the auspices of an urgent threat, but we aren't willing to put Parliament to work for what, an additional week to get things right? The debate on amendments does not need to be rushed. We could easily extend committee hearings by an additional week, provide resources for the committee to sit every day, and engage in a more thoughtful process to hear from experts, improve the bill, and pass it through the House by Canada Day.
Now, love him or hate him, he makes some very valid points. And the one thing that I did like about Bill C-5 was the interprovincial trade, which technically the federal government doesn't really have too much of a hand in that. That has to be done between the provinces and the premiers. So what we've been seeing with Doug Ford and Wab Kinew or Danielle Smith, Scott Moe, where they've been coming together, signing these agreements. That's what we need to see more of. And even Chrystia Freeland, when she was in the Senate, she kind of made this same point, saying that the federal government doesn't really have too much of a hand in this.
In fact, interprovincial barriers to trade and to labor mobility are not principally imposed by the federal government. They are principally imposed by provinces. And that's why, in my opening comments, it was important for me to give credit where credit is due to provinces who are racing ahead. But it's my belief that the federal government needs to do its part. Provinces, frankly, have been magnificent on this, and this legislation is about all of us responsible for Canada saying, provinces and territories, well done. We are matching what you're doing. We're doing our part, and it's about building the momentum to get this done.
Now, as much as I do agree that we need to start getting these projects initiated, started, we can't have all this time frame to wait for things. I do have a problem with the second half of the bill where it does give them this sweeping power. And in the National Post article, when we get back to it, it does say that the Conservative MP Shannon Stubbs says that she expects the Liberals to fix C-5 and make it transparent, clear, and certain. Amendments including and adding a clear definition of what is in the national interest, a concrete 2-year timeline between the final decision by Cabinet on a project and its completion, and ensuring project deliverables are achieved on time and on budget. All very valid things. Liberal MP Judy Sgro defended her government's decision to fast-track the legislation, saying that it's an opportunity for Canada to really become an economic engine that we know it can be in consultation with all the various groups that matter to us. But again, this bill would kind of give them the ability to not consult with anybody if they didn't really want to. The Conservatives are working with us, she added. On Monday, Conservatives voted for the governing Liberals to speed up debate on C-5 despite intense criticism from the Bloc, the NDP, the Green Party leader Elizabeth May, and are expected to support the bill at the second reading later this evening. And this actually was recorded in the House of Commons. You're going to see that everybody voted except for those three parties against this.
I wish to inform the House the electronic voting period has now ended. If members were unable to vote due to technical issues, they may now use the raise hand function and the chair will recognize them. The table will now compile the results of the vote.
Yeas pour 29, 29. Nays contre 305, 305.
I declare the amendment defeated.
So right there, you have the Conservatives and the Liberals voting yes to move this bill into the second reading, which then brings it into the committee so that they can parse through it. But the issue is they only have today, Tuesday, and tomorrow, Wednesday, to do so, because come Friday, they're going to put forward the vote again to pass this legislation. Now, Nate Erskine-Smith in his little speech said, why are we trying to do this all this week? We could even go into the summer. And all the other parties, except for the Liberal Party, have said that they are willing to move into next week or even the week after into the summer vacation to kind of work through this thing and hammer it down. Elizabeth May even made the point that this should actually be two separate bills, as I talked about last time, because the interprovincial trade should be its own bill. The second half should be its own bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honor to rise to speak at second reading to Bill C-5. But I wish I never had to speak to the bill because I wish I'd never had to read the bill. And reading it and understanding it has been one of the most crushingly depressing experiences I've had since I was first elected to this place in 2011. As the Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona quoted a noted journalist, Althea Raj, as saying this is the kind of bill Stephen Harper would have liked to bring forward, but he wouldn't have had the nerve. This is an abomination, and it is not necessary in the quest for building a strong Canadian economy. It doesn't remove the interprovincial barriers to the extent they need to be removed, because that's not within the federal government's purview to do with the stroke of a pen. But it says it's going to. It's going to remove some of the barriers where the federal government can, and then the next part of the bill, which is rather a separate bill and should have been dealt with separately, part two, is an entirely different construct, and unlike anything I've ever seen before in legislation. So let's try to walk through this calmly, dispassionately, and urge that the government rethink the way in which this bill is being rammed through Parliament within 4 days. That is not defensible. The bill requires amendments, it requires study, and although I've heard many members in this place, Liberals, stand up and including the government House leader, say, we want it studied. Well, if you want it studied, you have to schedule hearings. They can't take place in less than 24 hours and call them hearings that heard from witnesses and experts. The programming motion is as offensive as the bill itself, and that's actually saying quite a lot about it. I've been struggling with trying to decide which adage does this bill really prove? Haste makes waste, or the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because both are undoubtedly true.
So yesterday, I found myself siding a lot more with Elizabeth May and Nate Erskine-Smith versus the Conservatives. And that's not to say that I don't understand that there is an importance for these nation-building projects. I get it. We want to get these pipelines built as fast as possible, the mines open for the critical minerals, all that kind of stuff. But to just give this blank sweeping power is not a good idea. And it states that it will be lasting for 5 years, meaning even the next government, whether it's conservative or liberal again or anything else like an NDP, means that they will have that power. And I wouldn't want that for a conservative government to just bypass a democratic process and have sweeping powers that they can decide whatever kind of projects they want can be implemented. Just like I wouldn't want the liberals to have that. So With all that being said, I was a little disappointed in the Conservatives' vote. That doesn't necessarily mean come Friday they're going to vote the same way. You know, after today and tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, the committee hearings, after they find out whatever they find out through their parsing, maybe come Friday they say, we actually didn't like what happened with the rest of the bill, so we're not going to vote for it, or, you know, there's not enough proper amendments, things aren't fixed, and they won't vote for it. Who knows? We'll only find out come Friday. But one thing I was happy that happened yesterday in the House of Commons with the votes was the Conservatives put forward a motion to actually get the money back from GC Strategies, the $64 million that the company took to make the Arrive scam app, as they call it. Everybody in the House voted for that to get the Canadian taxpayers' money back, except the Liberals. Take a look.
The question is as follows. Mr. Barrett, seconded by Mr. McCauley, moved that given that the Auditor General found that Arrive contractor G... Shall I dispense? I didn't think so. That given that the Auditor General found that Arrive contracted GC Strategies Inc. was paid $64 million from the Liberal government, and in many cases there was no proof that any work was completed, the House call on the government to A, get taxpayers their money back within 100 days of the adoption of this motion, and B, impose a lifetime contracting ban on GC Strategies Inc., any of its subsidiaries, its founders Christian Firth and Darren Anthony, and any other entities with which those individuals are affiliated. If members were not able to vote due to technical difficulties, they may now use the raised hand function, and the chair will recognize them. I see a hand raised for Ms. Sahota.
Mr. Speaker, I vote against.
Tim. Seeing no other hands, the table will now compile the results of the vote.
Yeas pour 172, 172. Nays contre 165, 165.
I declare the motion carried.
Now, if you're a Liberal voter, it's not looking so good for you guys. This whole elbows up, Liberals are the best. These guys aren't even willing to vote to get your money back. Your own taxpayer money, $64 million that was mismanaged, given to this corrupt company that the Liberal government procured and gave them multiple contracts, was caught by the Auditor General, and they aren't even willing to vote yes to give you your money back, regardless of how much it is that you would get back. It's just a little bit rich coming from these guys who are all elbows up. Donald Trump is bad, yada, yada, yada. Like, they got a strong mandate from Canadians, yet clearly aren't even willing to work for you guys with a simple vote like that. Pretty sad. With all that being said, let me know what you guys think about all this. Do you agree with Nate and Elizabeth May? Do you agree with what the Conservatives decided to do? Let me know in the comment section below. If you can, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And I'm not sure how many other videos I'm putting out this week because my daughter's birthday is coming up, so I'll be preparing with that. But with all that being said, catch you guys on the next one, and hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. Take it easy.